I want to tell you something about my truck first. It was a 2003 Ford F-15. Oh, dark green, with a dent above the rear left wheel arch that I'd been meaning to fix for 11 years. The passenger seat had a crack in the upholstery that I'd covered with a folded moving blanket. The radio worked on 3 stations, and I had to press the volume knob down at a particular angle to get any sound at all. I drove it to the office every morning and parked it in the same spot in the lot, between a Mercedes and a BMW, and the guys who worked the front desk had long since stopped raising an eyebrow. I liked the truck. It was my truck. I am Jeff Callahan. I am 58 years old. I have a consulting firm in Portland, Oregon, that I started writing code for in my garage when I was 26, before I had a wife, before I had a son, before I had any idea what my life would become. The software package I built in that garage is now used by over 300 mid-sized logistics companies across 11 countries. The firm employs 41 people. The revenue last year was, well, it doesn't matter what the number is. It was enough. I never told anyone except Zoe. That probably sounds strange to you. A man who runs a multi-million-dollar operation and keeps it quiet, who drives a dented truck and wears flannel shirts and lets people assume he's an ordinary working man with an ordinary working life. But I want you to understand something. I came from nothing. My father worked 2 jobs and still couldn't keep the heat on in January. My mother clipped coupons until her fingers bled. I grew up knowing exactly what it meant to be the kid in the wrong shoes at the right school. And I swore 2 things to myself when the money started coming in. 1, I would never let it make me something different. And 2, I would give my children everything I didn't have. Not just the money or the things, but the security, the safety, the knowledge that there was always a floor beneath them. I kept both of those promises for a long time, and then my son Art stood at the entrance to his own wedding reception and pointed me toward the parking cones. I need to tell you about Zoe before I can tell you anything else, because none of what happened to our family makes any sense without her. Her name was Zoe Callahan, born Zoe Marchetti. She was 31 when we married, I was 32, and she was the only person in my life, before or since, who I ever felt completely visible to. I don't mean that she saw my bank balance or my business or my ambitions. I mean she saw the rest of it. The kid from the cold house, the man who still flinched sometimes when a bill came in the mail, the parts of yourself you don't show anyone because you're not sure they'd know what to do with them. I told her about the company on our 4th date, just the shape of it, not the details, what I'd built, what it was worth. I watched her face and I waited for the shift that always happens when people find out, that subtle recalibration, the way their eyes move differently over you once they know. She said, "Does that mean we can have dessert?" I married her 8 months later. Art was born 2 years after the wedding, in February at 4:17 in the morning, after a labor that lasted 14 hours and left Zoe looking simultaneously destroyed and radiant in a way I have never been able to adequately describe. I held him in the recovery room while she slept, this small, wrinkled person who weighed 7 pounds and had Zoe's nose. I sat in that chair beside her bed and made him the same 2 promises I had made myself. He was 5 years old when she died. I'll try to tell you this plainly because I have told it so many times in my own head that I've learned the only way through it is straight. It was a Saturday in October. Zoe had gone into town, downtown Portland, mid-morning to pick up something for an event we had that weekend. A gift, I think, for someone's retirement. She texted me from the shop. I texted back. Those were the last words we ever exchanged, and they were completely ordinary, which I am grateful for, in the strange way you become. Grateful for small mercies when the larger ones are gone. She walked out of the shop toward the entrance of the underground parking garage on 6th. A black SUV came down the street with its windows down. What followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, according to the witnesses who gave statements to the police. A dispute between 2 gangs that had nothing to do with a 33-year-old woman buying a retirement gift on a Saturday morning. There was gunfire, and Zoe was caught in the crossfire. Zoe felt the burn in her stomach before she understood what had happened. She fell on the sidewalk. People shouted, "Someone called 911." 3 people knelt beside her, but she was gone before the ambulance arrived. I was at the office when the call came in. I remember the specific quality of the light through my window, autumn light, low and golden. And I remember the detective's voice, careful and steady. I remember that I sat in my chair for a very long time after the call ended without being able to stand up. Art was at home with our neighbor, Mrs. Fujita, who had been watching him since morning. I had to drive home and tell a 5-year-old boy that his mother wasn't coming back. I have done harder things in my life than run a company. That was the hardest. I raised Art alone. I'm not complaining, just stating fact. My partner at the firm, a good man named Dennis Hart, who had been with me since the 2nd year, took over day-to-day operations for 6 months after Zoe died. I didn't ask him to. He simply appeared at my door one Monday morning, sat across my desk and said, "Go home, Jeff. Be with your kid. I've got this." Dennis is one of the best human beings I have ever known, and I would lay down my life for him. So I went home and stayed with my kid. I learned to make pancakes because Art liked them on Saturday mornings. I learned the names of every character in every cartoon series that existed between 2009 and 2016. I coached his Little League team for 3 seasons, despite knowing almost nothing about baseball. I sat in the front row of every school play and Christmas concert, still in my flannel shirt, usually the tallest person in the room. I was there for the first day of every grade, the first bike without training wheels, the first time a kid at school said something cruel, and Art came home quiet in the way that tells you something has happened that he's not ready to talk about yet. I gave him money when he needed it. I paid for his college without telling him the account had no real ceiling. I set up a fund when he turned 21 that he could draw from for a first home, a first business, whatever he needed. I bought him a condo in Seattle when he got his first job there. Clean title, no mortgage, just his. A place that was his to live in and his to keep. I put a credit card in his wallet that I told him was for emergencies and never questioned how he used it. I didn't do any of this because I was trying to buy his love. I did it because I remembered being cold in January, and I had promised my son he never would be. What I perhaps didn't do enough of, and I have spent considerable time in the years since sitting with this, was make sure Art understood where all of it came from. I was so committed to being the ordinary man, to not letting the money change the texture of our life together, that I may have let my son grow up without a true picture of who his father was. He knew I ran a software consulting firm. He knew it did well enough. He didn't know, because I didn't tell him, that his father was worth more than most people he would ever meet. He saw the truck and the flannel shirts and the modest house in the suburb where I'd lived since before he was born, and he drew the conclusions that a young man draws. I should have corrected him. I told myself I was protecting him from something. The entitlement that comes from knowing, the loss of ordinary hungers that makes a person interesting and grounded. These were real concerns. They were also, I now understand, a form of pride on my part, a decision I made for both of us without asking him. Art grew up. He was bright and handsome and funny in the way that Zoe had been funny, quick, and warm. He went to college in Seattle, studied business, landed a good job at a tech company, and somewhere in his mid-20s started moving in circles that I recognized but had never belonged to. The dinners with the right people, the apartment in the right neighborhood, the careful attention to surfaces. He had a girlfriend named Cassie Ellsworth. Her family was old money, Pacific Northwest old, which is a particular variety, more outdoors than ostentation, but unmistakably aware of itself. They weren't unkind people, but they had categories, the way people with long-established wealth sometimes do, and I could see on the occasions we were all together that Jeff Callahan in his flannel shirt fell clearly into one of the lesser ones. I noticed the way Art watched me when I was around Cassie's family, the slight stiffening, the quick subject changes whenever someone asked me about my work. The way he once, at a dinner with her parents, described my company as a small software business and moved on before anyone could ask a follow-up. I said nothing. I should have said something then. The ceremony was in a vineyard outside Woodinville, Washington in June, the kind of venue that was charged for per hour, which was a hefty sum. Cassie's family had arranged most of it. I offered to contribute and was politely but firmly declined. I had understood the message. I drove up the morning of the wedding. I had my good jacket on, a black wool, the one I wore to every occasion that called for one. My best flannel shirt underneath, which I was aware wasn't what the dress code on the invitation had suggested. I had looked at the dress code and thought, I own a jacket, I will wear my jacket, and if that isn't enough, then we will find out. The venue was beautiful in the way that money, applied correctly, can make almost anything beautiful. White tents, string lights in the oaks, a string quartet warming up near a low stone wall. Guests arriving in cars that made my truck look ancient. I parked and walked to the entrance. A young man in a white shirt and black vest was directing guests. I stepped past him toward the main door. Then I heard Art's voice. Dad. I turned. My son was standing 10 feet away in a gray morning suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair done in a way I'd never seen on him. He looked different, like someone trying hard to be a different person. His eyes moved over me once quick, the way you assess a situation, and something shifted in his face, something close to a decision. He walked toward me and lowered his voice. Dad, I need you to... Look, this isn't... He stopped and started again. Cassie's family are all here, her grandfather's here. I just need today to go a certain way, and I need you to... He paused, looked toward the entrance, and then back at me. They need help with the valet service out front. Would you mind just helping out there for the ceremony? I stood very still. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. It wasn't rage. The rage comes later when you've had time to process things. What I felt in that first moment was a specific quality of grief, The kind that has nothing to do with death and everything to do with recognition. The recognition of a loss you didn't know you'd already suffered. I looked at my son. He was 30 years old, standing in a gray morning suit at his wedding, asking his father to go park cars so that his new family wouldn't have to look at him. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him since he was a teenager, that particular combination of shame and self-justification, the face of a person who knows they are doing something wrong and has decided to do it anyway. I thought about Zoe. I thought about the Saturday morning. I thought about the 4:17 a.m. when the small wrinkled person was placed in my arms, and the 2 promises I made back then. I thought, I kept mine. All right, I said. I turned around and I walked back to my truck. I drove away from that vineyard without looking in the rearview mirror because I already knew what was back there. I didn't need to see it again. I drove 3 hours back to Portland. I didn't stop or call anyone. I put the radio on the one station that worked without pressing the knob at an angle. And I drove, I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened without trying to manage it. I had learned after Zoe died that real grief for real loss demands to be felt all the way through. You can't ration it or redirect it or file it away for a more convenient time. It comes whether you invite it or not, and the only honest thing to do is let it come. So I drove and I felt it. By the time I reached Portland, it had moved through me enough that I could think clearly. I went home, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. I sat with it for a long time, not doing anything, just sitting, because I wanted to be certain. I wanted to make sure I wasn't acting from rage or wounded pride or the hot, immediate aftermath of humiliation. I waited until all of that had settled. It took most of the night. When I was certain, when I had arrived at the cold, clear, quiet place that is not anger but something more final, I called Dennis the following morning and told him what had happened. Dennis listened quietly. When I finished, he said nothing for a moment and then said, "What do you need from me?" That is the kind of man Dennis is. I canceled the credit card first. Then I transferred the condo title into a holding company, not selling it, not yet, just removing Art's name from it. I closed his access to the fund. I removed him from the accounts that had simply always been open to him, the quiet financial scaffolding of his adult life that he had likely stopped noticing the way you stop noticing the walls of a room you live in. I gave each cancellation its own moment. I didn't rush through the list. Then I called my realtor and put my house on the market. It sold in 3 weeks. I took what I needed, the truck, the laptop, the photograph of Zoe from the bedroom windowsill, my grandfather clock in the lounge, and I put everything else in storage or gave it away. I found a house on the Oregon coast, 40 minutes from the nearest town, paid cash for it the way I had always paid for things when it mattered, quietly and without fuss. I changed my number, informed my assistant and Dennis and 3 other people in the world who needed to know where I was. Everyone else got silence. I wasn't hiding. I was simply no longer available to the version of my life that had produced that vineyard moment. I was done with that version. I was moving to a different one. Art called the night I changed my number. The calls went to the old voicemail for a few days before the line was disconnected. I was told later that he left 11 messages. I never listened to them. I didn't not listen to them because I didn't care. It was because I had earned the right at 58 years old to stop listening to things that were no longer true. Let me tell you about the 5 years I disappeared. They weren't miserable. People assume, when they hear the shape of this story, that the father must have been sitting somewhere in bitterness, counting the days until his son came crawling back. That's not what happened. I was happy. I worked remotely. Dennis and I had built the firm into something that ran well without my daily presence, and the arrangement suited both of us. I worked mornings, usually from the kitchen table with the ocean visible through the window, and by noon I was done with the things that required my attention. The afternoons were mine. I learned to fish properly, not the casual weekend fishing of my earlier life, but the real kind that requires you to be still for long stretches and to pay attention to things smaller than yourself. I read more books in those 5 years than in the previous 20. I took up woodworking, badly at first, then tolerably, then with a genuine competence that gave me more satisfaction than almost anything I had done since writing the original code in my garage. I had a neighbor 3 miles down the coast, a retired marine biologist named Harriet, who came over for dinner twice a week and had opinions about everything. She was exactly the right kind of company, present without being intrusive, curious without being invasive. I thought about art. Of course I did. Not every day, not after the first year, but regularly in the way you think about a wound that has closed over. You don't touch it constantly, but you know it's there. I thought about what I should have done differently. The answer I kept arriving at was, I should have told him the truth earlier. Not about the money, or rather, not only about the money, about who I was, about where I had come from, about the fact that the truck and the flannel shirts were not embarrassments to be managed, but choices I had made deliberately, from a place of hard-won understanding about what actually matters. I had wanted to protect him from the distorting weight of wealth. Instead, I had left him without a frame for his father, without a story that made sense of the ordinary man and the quiet life. And into that gap, without meaning to, he had inserted something smaller than the truth. That was on me. Not all of it, but enough of it. He found me in the 5th year. I don't know exactly how. I suspect Dennis, who wouldn't have given him the address, but who might, knowing Dennis, have allowed certain information to become available through channels he could reasonably deny. I never asked, and Dennis has never offered. I saw the car come up the coast road on a Thursday afternoon in September. A rental, compact. The kind of car you book when you're not sure how a trip is going to go, and you don't want to be seen arriving in something that makes a statement. I was on the porch with a cup of coffee when it pulled into the drive. Art got out. He was 35 years old. He had lost weight. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. His hair was shorter than I remembered, and he looked, for the first time in perhaps a decade, like my son. He stood by the car and looked at me on the porch. "Dad," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about what I wanted to feel. Then I stopped trying to manage it and just felt what was actually there. It was love, tired and complicated and still. After everything, love. "You want coffee?" I said. He came up the porch steps, sat in the chair beside mine. I went inside and got him a cup and came back out. We sat together for a while, with the ocean in front of us and the coffee getting cold, with neither of us saying anything. The silence wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was honest. And honesty was more than we'd managed at that vineyard. He told me what the 5 years had been. The marriage hadn't lasted. Cassie's family had been one of the things holding it together. But when Art's circumstances changed, when the condo was no longer his, the accounts were no longer open, and the quiet financial floor he had always stood on simply wasn't there. One morning, the relationship changed with it. He didn't say this as an accusation. He said it the way a person recounts something they've spent a long time understanding. He had lost his job 18 months after the wedding, a restructuring, not a firing, but the savings weren't there to cushion it the way they would have been before. He'd spent a year consulting with smaller clients, modest rates, and was only recently back on steadier ground. He was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Seattle. He drove a 10-year-old Civic. "I thought about calling every day for the first 2 years, he said. Then I stopped. I don't know if that was giving up or growing up. "Probably both," I said. He looked at his coffee cup. "I need you to know I understand what I did at the wedding. I've understood it for a long time." "I know," I said. "I need you to know I'm not here because I need money, or because I found out." He stopped. I looked at him. "Found out what?" I said. He met my eyes. Something shifted in his face. "Dennis told me what the company is worth, Dad. When I finally reached him, he said he thought I should know before I came to see you, so that you'd know my reasons were real." He said the number. I watched his face as he said it. I watched what it did to him. Not the number itself, but the understanding of what the number meant, what it had always meant. The truck, the flannel shirts, the modest house in the suburb. The credit card he had spent freely from for a decade, without knowing he was spending from a fund that had no real ceiling. I watched my son understand all at once, the size of what he had thrown away at the entrance to a vineyard to impress people who were not his family. He put his coffee cup down on the porch railing. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. His shoulders moved once. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, "Art, look at me." He looked at me. "What you did at the wedding was the most painful thing anyone has ever done to me. I want you to know that. More painful than losing accounts, more painful than professional failure, more painful than almost anything, because you are my son and I raised you and I thought you knew what I was made of." He didn't look away. "But I also made mistakes. I kept things from you that you deserved to know. I thought I was giving you the childhood I wanted, ordinary and honest, uncontaminated by wealth. What I actually gave you was a version of your father without enough context to understand him, and that's on me." "It doesn't excuse—" "No," I said, "it doesn't. I'm not offering it as an excuse. I'm offering it as the truth because I'm done with incomplete truths. Your mother and I didn't have any of those, and I've spent 20-some years missing her for a lot of reasons, and that's one of them." Art looked at the ocean for a long time. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "For all of it." I nodded. "I know. Is there a way back from this?" I picked up my coffee cup and looked at my son, at his face, which still had Zoe's nose, which still had 20-some years of my raising in it, and still looked like the person I'd held in a recovery room at 4:17 in the morning and made promises to. "There's always a way back," I said. "It's just not fast and it's not free." He nodded. "I know." "Stay for dinner," I said. "Harriet's coming. She'll like you." He almost smiled. "Yeah? She has opinions about everything. You'll fit right in." He did almost smile then. It was Zoe's smile, quick, warm, and real, and I was grateful for it in the way you become grateful for small mercies when the larger ones are gone. I want to be honest with you about the recovery because I think the stories we tell about reconciliation often skip the hard middle part and go straight to the warmth of the ending. It took time, more time than either of us would have chosen. Art came back to the coast 3 times in the following year. The conversations were careful at first, the kind of careful that happens when 2 people are both aware that the wrong word could close things down again. We talked about Zoe more than we had in years. I told him things about his mother that I had kept to myself, not secrets, but because there hadn't been a moment that felt right. Her laugh, the way she ordered dessert, the text she sent me the morning she died, which I still have on a phone I can no longer make calls from, but that I charge once a week, every week, without ever looking at it. He cried the 3rd visit. He cried for his mother, about being 5 years old and not having enough years with her to know her the way I knew her, about growing up with a father who loved him so much he gave him everything, and somehow, in all of that giving, hadn't found a way to give him the full truth. I cried too. I'm not too old or too proud to tell you that. We're not where we were. I think we may never be where we would have been if none of this had happened. There are things that change the shape of a relationship permanently, and what Art did at that vineyard is one of them, not because I haven't forgiven him, but because forgiveness doesn't reverse the knowledge. I know now what my son is capable of when he's afraid. That is a thing I cannot unknow. I simply have to choose every day to love the person who is capable of that, alongside the person who drove a rental car up a coast road in September and said, "I need you to know I understand what I did." He is working steadily, honestly, with no floor beneath him, that I didn't build myself from cold Januaries in a garage and 20 years of quiet work. He is better for it. I think he knows that. The truck finally died last year. The engine gave out on a Friday morning in April, quietly without drama, the way things tend to go. I had it towed to the scrapyard and watched it go. I felt something that wasn't quite grief, wasn't quite relief, but was somewhere between the two. Art bought me a new one, dark green, because he remembered. A few years old, a few small dents already in it from the previous owner. He delivered it in person, handed me the keys on the porch, and said, "I thought you should have one that still works." I drove it to the end of the coast road and back. I liked it. Jeff Callahan isn't a man who needed revenge. What he needed was to stop pretending that what was done to him didn't matter. The valet parking, the parking cone at his own son's wedding, the moment his boy looked at him and chose a stranger's approval over 20 years of love. He didn't shout or confront. He didn't post anything on social media or call anyone to explain himself. He simply removed the scaffolding quietly, the way a person removes their hand from something that is burning them, and he went to live his life on his own terms. That was the most loving thing he could have done, because the scaffolding hadn't been helping Art grow. It had been letting him stay small. The hardest part of loving someone is sometimes letting them stand on their own floor, even when the fall is long, even when the landing hurts, even when you could have caught them and chose not to, because catching them again would have taught them nothing about how to catch themselves. There is something in Jeff's story for every parent who has wondered whether giving everything is the same as giving what matters. And there is something in Art's story for everyone who has ever let the fear of being ordinary make them do something that wasn't. Now, I want to hear from you. Was Jeff right to walk away without a word? Did Art deserve those 5 years of hard lessons? Or was the punishment too much? And at what point, in your view, does a parent's silence become its own kind of cruelty? Tell me in the comments. If this one landed with you, if it made you think about your own life, your own people, your own silences, please subscribe to Story Junkie. Hit the bell so you never miss one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. New stories every week, told the whole way through. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and God bless quietly, without drama, the way things tend to go. I had it towed to the scrapyard and watched it go. I felt something that wasn't quite grief, wasn't quite relief, but was somewhere between the two. Art bought me a new one, dark green, because he remembered. A few years old, a few small dents already in it from the previous owner. He delivered it in person, handed me the keys on the porch, and said, "I thought you should have one that still works." I drove it to the end of the coast road and back. I liked it. Jeff Callahan isn't a man who needed revenge. What he needed was to stop pretending that what was done to him didn't matter. The valet parking, the parking cone at his own son's wedding, the moment his boy looked at him and chose a stranger's approval over 20 years of love. He didn't shout or confront. He didn't post anything on social media or call anyone to explain himself. He simply removed the scaffolding quietly, the way a person removes their hand from something that is burning them, and he went to live his life on his own terms. That was the most loving thing he could have done because the scaffolding hadn't been helping Art grow. It had been letting him stay small. The hardest part of loving someone is sometimes letting them stand on their own floor, even when the fall is long, even when the landing hurts, even when you could have caught them and chose not to, because catching them again would have taught them nothing about how to catch themselves. There is something in Jeff's story for every parent who has wondered whether giving everything is the same as giving what matters. And there is something in Art's story for everyone who has ever let the fear of being ordinary make them do something that wasn't. Now, I want to hear from you. Was Jeff right to walk away without a word? Did Art deserve those 5 years of hard lessons, or was the punishment too much? And at what point, in your view, does a parent's silence become its own kind of cruelty? Tell me in the comments if this one landed with you, if it made you think about your own life, your own people, your own silences. Please subscribe to Story Junkie. Hit the bell so you never miss one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. New stories every week, told the whole way through. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and God bless.